Welcome to Uncommon Sense, where we do our best to make it common again. I'm your host, Adrian Alquist. Today I'm joined again by Alan C. Duncan. Alan, how are you?
I'm doing well. I'm doing great. Thanks for having me back. I really appreciate it.
Absolutely. You were a very popular guest when you talked about your audiobook, Gilbert and Jack, and the research you had done about how C.S. Lewis was very inspired by G.K. Chesterton. And if you were at our conference this weekend, we actually haven't even been to the conference. We were recording this before the conference, but Alan was a guest speaker at that conference, and he's going to be he's talked about that, right? I don't know how to
Yeah.
talk future or past tense, but yeah.
Yeah, we're in a weird zone right now. It's right before the conference, but they're hearing it right after. So I'm going to go out on a limb and say the conference was really, really fun. So
Good.
I
I'm
think
yes,
it's going to
I'll
be.
believe
Yeah,
it. Yeah.
yeah, I think it's going to be.
Yeah. Great. Well, we have a new topic today. It's kind of out there. We
Yeah.
wanted to talk about if Chesterton would have liked rap. And I think it's a really fun idea. Alan came to me and said, "Hey, how about we, debate about this?" And unfortunately, we wanted to take the same position. We both wanted to
Yeah.
argue
Yeah.
that Chesterton actually would have liked rap.
Yeah.
And maybe it's a little more complicated, but that's why we're going to have more of a discussion. And I'll, try to, be the devil's advocate sometimes. But Alan, did you want to, start off by saying anything about that?
Sure. Well, I first of all, thanks for letting us do this talk. I think it'll be really fun. Now, I imagine this is a topic that's either going to make people very happy or make people kind of upset. So I could see this
Yeah.
going either way, depending on how somebody approaches this. Perhaps this conversation that we're about to have, maybe the person who wants to debate us will hear this and they'll get in contact. Maybe some of our other listeners will say, "Hey, I do want to debate the other side of that."
Yeah,
Chesterton would not
and
like rap.
that's a good point. I encourage people to put in the YouTube comments what your opinion is. If you have any objections, if you agree with us, because we actually really appreciate the feedback and what you guys think. We really like the conversation. So feel free to put it out there. Also, just one last thing about the conference. I don't have to promote it anymore, but if you did attend it, if you signed up and registered, and if you're a member, you should be able to watch it afterwards. So we'll be putting that together. And also in the future, sign up for future Chesterton conferences, because these podcasts I'll still be promoting chesterton.org/conference, and that'll be where to go for the next conference. So yeah, already
Nice.
looking ahead. Yeah.
Perfect.
All right.
That's great.
So I want to give you the floor, starting off
Okay.
about what Chesterton would like rap.
Well, I think the first thing that I want to mention is there are clearly things in some rap music that Chesterton would not like. I think there's drug use and some violence and degrading comments about women. There's a
Well,
lot of stuff in some rap that he would not appreciate at all. So I just say that up front.
kind of a general like hedonism philosophy in a lot of the
Yes.
music. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but I totally
No, yeah,
agree.
no, yeah, China
Yeah,
and nihilism and things like that in
yeah,
some of it. So there's clearly stuff that he would not appreciate and would
yeah.
not
And for those who say it's a
co-sign.
cultural thing, I would disagree with that. I don't think worship of pleasure makes a culture. So
Sure.
yeah. So anyway, continue.
Yeah, so I think that's just as the disclaimer to start it. Hopefully that if so somebody's kind of getting frustrated at even this as a topic, but hopefully that'll kind of let's breathe. Let's breathe. We're not saying he would like some of this stuff. But the there are some things I think he would appreciate about the art form or the genre as a whole. And we were talking before we got started that I said I've got two kind of big, extensive quotes that I want to read because I don't want to put words in Chesterton's mouth. He's written enough. I don't think we need to do that. So I want to let him speak for himself, but I think that we can apply it to the topic that we're talking about. Um, and so I want to talk first and foremost about rhyming, just the sheer nature of rhyme is something that Chesterton would appreciate about rap music. So, in Fancies versus Fads, Chesterton's book, there's a chapter called "The Slavery of Free Verse," And Chesterton is talking about kind of the spirit of the age back then. He wrote this in 1923, but the spirit of the age even then was that people didn't want to be encumbered when they were writing their poetry. They didn't want to be encumbered by having to rhyme things. You know, what could be more enslaving than having to adhere to meter or rhyme? They just wanted to write freely. So Chesterton is attacking kind of that mindset, that spirit of the age. And so he's talking about this unmetered, unrhyming modern poetry. And then he's telling you why he actually does like rhyme. Because Chesterton is a poet. You know, most people, you know, probably watching this, most people know that. But
Hopefully,
if not,
hopefully.
yeah, he's a poet. And so Chesterton says this. Again, this is an extensive quote, but I've actually pared it down. So it could have been longer. But Chesterton says, he says, I've always had the fancy that if a man were really free, he would talk in rhythm and even in rhyme. His most hurried postcard would be a sonnet. His most hasty wires like harpstrings. He would breathe a song into the telephone. And if a man could ask for a potato in the form of a poem, the poem would not merely be a more romantic, but a more realistic rendering of a potato. For a potato is a poem. If it is even an ascending scale of poems. And I trimmed this part, but if you should read this. He goes on and he describes a potato in great detail and very beautifully. And then he says this, but the truth behind all this is that expressed in the very ancient mystical notion, the music of the spheres. It is the idea that at the back of everything, existence begins with a harmony and not a chaos.
Wow, that's
God
beautiful.
as the creator. Yeah, God as creator. It's not chaos, it's harmony, it's order. There is order in the universe. And so I'm going to go right back up to the top of that quote and read the first part again. I have always had the fancy that if a man were really free, he would talk in rhythm and even in rhyme. And what is rap music, if not talking in rhythm and rhyme? So the sheer form of the art, I think that Chesterton would really appreciate. So I don't know.
Wow,
What do you think about that as kind of a, I don't know,
yeah, I
a
really
starting
like the
point?
idea. I really like the idea that if someone were really free, they would talk in rhymes. That's so paradoxical because you think, oh,
Yeah.
rhyming limits what you say, but it's kind of the walls of the playground that Chesterton talks about. It
Yes.
actually
Yes.
provides a fun way to talk, and
Yeah.
you see that in Shakespeare. Shakespeare is just so beautiful, and his most famous lines, will rhyme, and they're just great, and they're just perfectly crafted. Yeah, and I totally agree with you. I think it's an interesting thing. I have one quote by Chesterton. I have one quote by
Mm-hmm.
Chesterton, and it's about music. It's not about rap specifically, obviously, but he says music is beauty in solution. Now,
Mm-hmm.
I know that there's an argument that rap is not music, right? Because it's not tonal per se, although it kind of is, you know?
Yeah,
Um,
it depends. Yeah. Yeah. Sorry. Go ahead.
yeah, it depends. But what's funny also is that Chesterton was pretty tone deaf. I learned this very recently.
Was he
Um,
really?
yeah, yeah. So I that gives me an impression that hey, maybe he really would have liked the idea of rap for people, who wanted to isolate the beauty of the rhyming and not so
Yes.
much, didn't have a affinity towards notes and
Mm-hmm.
musical melodies and beautiful melodies. So I don't think you need to have that. I think you can isolate this thing, this rhyming, this rhythm, and it'd be beautiful. So yeah, that's what I would say.
That's interesting that you bring that up. Yeah, and I have heard that argument as well. So I'd like to, for someone saying that rap isn't music because it doesn't have harmony and melody. First of all, it does. You know, a lot of times someone sings the chorus or sings the
Hmm.
hook, and that's clearly melody. That's actually one of the ways that's actually kind of the way that my wife and I met. I do hip hop. I do hip hop from a Christian worldview because that's the other thing. As an art form, you can put whatever content you choose into the lyrics, and so I've rapped since I was probably 15 years old, and from a Christian worldview perspective. And my wife is a singer, And so instead of asking her out on a date, the first thing I asked her to do was sing on one of my rap songs. And
Oh,
so
great.
she certainly brought music and melody to my meter and rhyme. And so there is that
That's
in
really
most
special.
rap.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I want to link your stuff in the YouTube video. So if you're watching
Oh,
this
I
on
appreciate it.
YouTube, you can see, because I watched one of your videos and it was very impressive. I did not expect that.
Oh,
That was just
thanks.
great from
Oh,
a
well,
humanitarian like you. There's usually not an intersection there, but that's great. I love it. Yeah.
well, I appreciate that very much. Well, and so for people who are even still struggling, say, okay, is rap music? It's at least. Oh, I talk about it like this: it's a poem and a beat. It's at least that. It's at least poetry. Let's say you even took the beat off and you just read through some lyrics, some of the good stuff. And you just read through the lyrics. You find that you had a poem, and so I think that's important for people
Yeah.
to
And
think about
and
and remember.
and I've seen people argue that it's not music, to make the point that it's not good, and that's actually
Right, right.
I don't like that argument, because it's like saying, our roundabout's good for the environment or whatever, and then you
Mm.
switch it by saying, well, at what point does an intersection stop being an intersection? It's like, well, that's not the point. I mean, you don't have to categorize it that, but we're not talking about that. We're talking about the quality of how good the rap is, and how
What
good
it is,
so
yeah.
that's what I would say there. Yeah. Yeah.
That's a good way to think about it. Yeah.
So, yeah, you had another quote of Chesterton's, right?
I do. Well,
Nice.
it's funny. It's we were talking before this, and I said I wanted to make sure I said this on the broadcast instead of beforehand, because I don't want to forget. But it seems that Chesterton's quotes. It's another long quote. I wrote it down here, but
Okay, cool.
it, Chesterton. You either have to go in very tiny, small bites. Like he's so quotable. You could say one sentence, like you said. You brought one quote, like a tweet size quote, or you have to do like 2 or 3 pages.
Yeah, it's true.
There's not like it's like either one sentence or 35 sentences. He doesn't have like you can't just lift a paragraph. He's either doing a full argument over like 3 long pages, or you can pull the one pull quote. So I have tried to boil down like 2 pages into this particular quote. Um, okay, so we talked about the form of rap and how I think Chesterton might appreciate the form. Oh, quickly though, before I get to this, I don't want to forget.
Mhm.
I think that he was a fan of Gilbert and Sullivan, the musical group that was big back then, and
Yeah.
they were very verbose, in terms of their writing. Their writing style, in many times, is very rapid fire and almost like a proto rap in certain ways. I'm not tying a link in any way from Gilbert and Sullivan to modern rap, although that would be interesting to look into. But
Yeah.
but the point being, it was a very wordy style of songwriting that Chesterton appreciated. He's a
Okay.
writer. He's a wordsmith person himself. So I think that he would appreciate the lyrical quality of hip hop music. You can fit so much content lyrically in a
Yeah.
short space because it's rapid fire and it's
Yeah.
coming at you quickly.
Absolutely.
Okay, so that's the form side of it, and then this quote that I would like to talk about comes from Heretics, his book Heretics, and the chapter titled "Slum Novelists and the Slums." And he's talking in this chapter. I guess at that time there were novels that were purported to be about people living in poverty. Okay, that must have been like an interesting thing for people to read back then. And he had an issue with it. And I'll read this quote, and that'll explain what his position was on this. He says, "Quote: Our slum fiction, as it was called then, is quite defensible as an aesthetic fiction." He's saying it's written pretty well. He goes, but it is not defensible as spiritual fact. One enormous obstacle stands in the way of its actuality. The men who write it and the men who read it are men of the middle classes or the upper classes, at least of those who are loosely termed the educated classes. So you're saying the people who are writing about people living in poverty are rich guys. He goes, hence the fact that it is the life as the refined man sees it, it proves that it cannot be the life as the unrefined man lives it. Rich men write stories about poor men and describe them as speaking with a coarse or heavy or husky enunciation. The slum novelist gains his whole effect by the fact that some detail is strange to the reader. But that detail, by the nature of the case, cannot be strange in itself. It cannot be strange to the soul which he is professing to study. The kind of man who could really express the pleasures of the poor would also be the kind of man who could share them. The novelist must not take out his notebook and say, I am an expert. No, he must slap himself on the chest and say, I am a man.
Wow.
So he's basically saying the problem with these quote slum novels at the time were they weren't written by the people that they were purporting to describe.
That's so interesting. That's still something that people notice nowadays. I just watched there's a very, very talented musical comedian named Bo Burnham. And
Mm-hmm.
he talks about how he doesn't dislike country music, but a lot of the country music nowadays are not written by the down to earth country guys that you would
Yeah,
expect. They're written by these white collar rich, millionaires, and they just have to say
yeah,
certain words to get the populace on there. Just have to like dirt road, cold
yeah.
beer, blue
Yes,
jeans,
yes,
and
yeah.
then, it's exactly what you're talking. Wow, that's so interesting. Yeah, yeah.
Yeah, it's and so I think when we look at rap music, and you could say country as well, but we're talking rap here today. I think that Chesterton would appreciate that the advent of rap music. You could even say you could say the soul music, gospel music, like gospel spirituals. You could say the blues. You could say rock and roll and jazz, and then on into hip hop. These were musical vehicles for the common everyday man to tell their stories.
Hmm. Yeah.
And I think that he would really appreciate that because there's such an everyman, a democratic impulse in Chesterton's writing and in his life that he would really like to see that the common man was and woman was creating this art form for themselves to tell their own stories.
Yeah,
Um,
that's so interesting. Yeah, I totally agree with that. I totally agree. And I had the idea that Chesterton, we know that Chesterton really was, he defended the French Revolution, for example, and a lot of times rap music is a vehicle to express discontent with, certain things in society and certain things in with people in power. And the
yeah,
reason for that, I think, is because you can be a little more aggressive, or show a little bit more anger in rap, which is not a bad thing, by the way. Anger is
right.
not a bad thing. Righteous indignation. so
Yeah.
so
Oh, yeah.
so yeah, I think that's totally right. Yeah.
Well, and it's interesting. Anything now can be hyper commercialized, and
Mhm.
so it is kind of this two edged sword where you see something that began in impoverished communities, began at the street level when people had maybe didn't have access to a lot of instruments. They did have access to turntables and samplers, um, and drum machines and things like that, and record collections, and they could create the sound beds to speak on top of or to rap on top of. Um,
Mhm.
but now there is a hyper commercialized portion of hip hop music where you have people who maybe came from poorer communities are now millionaires and billionaires, and so it's interesting. It's like
Exactly.
they came from this particular place and now they've ascended to another place, uh, and so they're kind of able to then reflect back on it. But then there's kind of that tension between, are you still speaking for that community? Are you still speaking truth to power when you get there? And different artists do it in different ways, and so you can't. There's not really a one size fits all there, but it is just an interesting kind of a two edged sword to think about when we're talking about this art
Yeah.
form.
Yeah, I agree. I mean, rap has the same problem that the country music that we were talking about
Mm-hmm.
has. Sometimes
Yeah,
they're honest about, and they just rap about how rich they are. But
Yeah.
it usually doesn't last. That doesn't go well. I mean, that's
Right.
at least not the rap that I would defend. So
Sure.
yeah.
Yeah. Exactly. And you know what? That's important that you bring that up. Oh, and this gets to another thing I think Chesterton would like about it as well. Um, but there's a lot of different kind of rap music. And this gets to what I think Chesterton would like about it. Chesterton Society talks a lot about localism. Rap is a very localized art form. People are constantly um, talking about their city, what city it's
Mhm.
coming from, even their street corners or their neighborhoods. It is a very local thing. Even for a lot of the big rappers that people would know, they are emanating from a hub, a cultural community, their local place. And I think Chesterton would really appreciate that. I mean, Chesterton is someone who wrote essays about cheese because of how local it was. The cheese versus
Yeah.
soap. Soap is just soap, but cheese represents the region it's from. And rap represents region. There's East Coast, West Coast. There's New York. There's LA, there's Compton, there's Atlanta, there's Chicago is a big rap hub.
Hmm.
So, and many more. But, I think he would appreciate that. So when someone thinks of hip hop or rap, you could find some stuff that you really, really like, and then you could find other stuff that you don't like at all. And there's rap that came out of the 80s and 90s that people really, really like. And then there's rap that's coming hot off the press today. So there's even eras and periods of time where rap is going to sound much different than it might if it's from another era.
Absolutely. Yeah. It's not all coming from Hollywood like a lot of pop music. So
Yes,
that's great.
yeah.
Yeah.
Hmm.
Yeah. So we kind of addressed some of the concerns that people would have with rap, or like the reason they wouldn't like it probably is, because certain rap, doesn't promote good messages,
Sure.
because, it's aggressive or something like that. And what are some other things that you maybe have heard or want to address for people who are still on the fence, and maybe you can like point them in the right direction, because if they
Sure.
go and look at the most popular app, maybe that's not the best idea.
Sure. Okay. Well, one of the places that I would direct somebody is, I'm not sure if you've seen this, but I mean, a lot of people have, is the musical Hamilton, that came
Oh
out,
yeah, so my
within the
favorite.
past
Oh,
several years. I love it. My kids love it. My wife and I love it. And
that's my
so,
favorite musical. I've watched it so many times now. It's so good.
yeah, it's
It's
great.
inspiring me to work on a musical myself right now. So
Oh,
it's
nice.
so
Well,
good. Yeah.
congrats. I would love. Oh, I want to hear more about that.
Okay.
Maybe off air.
Offline. Yeah. Yeah. I
Yeah,
won't
I'd
spoil
love to
it.
hear more about that.
Yeah. But
But
anyway.
that would be a place that I would encourage people to check out. Maybe they have, but that is a great example for somebody. It's within the context of musical theater, so you've got a frame of reference, and it's obviously talking about the American Revolution. And so these are characters and a story that you're familiar with. And so because sometimes people are a little bit daunted by rap just because you have to kind of train your ear to pick up on the cadences and the speed at which the lyrics are coming to you. And so if you're familiar generally with the American Revolution and some of the cast of characters, you could kind of start to follow along. And there are other songs that aren't pure rap that are within the context of that musical that if you needed a break, you're like, okay, here's a ballad, or a different style of music. So I would tell someone to check out that if they haven't
Mhm.
watched Hamilton already. And it's a great uh, example of using rap as storytelling, a vehicle for storytelling.
Yeah, and
Uh,
and Hamilton, I'm so glad you brought it up, because Hamilton is something that could have gone really wrong, just in terms of
yeah,
where it was promoted, why it was popular. It could have been really, bashing America. That's what
yeah.
I thought it was going to do. Just based off the trend and where, just the fact that it was so popular, I was like, this is suspicious.
Yeah,
And then I
something popular
watched
here.
it.
Something popular can't be good, can
Yeah,
it?
exactly. Well, yeah,
Yeah.
I'm kind of. I guess I'm a hipster in that way. But no, I watched it and it was great. It promoted the right things. It wasn't incendiary towards America. It was just great all across the board.
Yeah.
It was so good. Lin Manuel Miranda, he worked on it for like 6 years. He said, just intensely,
Yeah.
and it shows. So yeah,
Yeah,
yeah.
so I agree. Yeah, I agree. I think it's really really well done, and something that someone, if they wanted to dip their toe into hip hop that has, a message that they could understand and get behind, that'd be a place to start. I did jot down a couple of other names, some rappers that come from a Christian perspective. And again, I don't necessarily agree with every single thing that any of these people that I'm going to list say. That's kind of like the Twitter disclaimer, like retweet does not equal endorsement or whatever. But
Yeah.
but I think there's enough good in a lot of these names that I'm going to say that they'd be worth checking out for people. And a lot of people have maybe heard of Lecrae. I'm not sure if you're familiar with Lecrae or not, but he raps from a Christian
I'm not,
worldview
but
as
I'm not
well.
a good example.
Okay, that's
But
fair.
okay,
That's fair.
yeah.
Um, let's see. I've got a couple of these guys are actually my friends. Steve G is a guy that I've worked with that he raps from a Christian worldview. Cephas, a guy who goes by Cephas. He's one of my friends. He raps from a Christian worldview. Another guy by the name of Ruslan. He raps from a Christian worldview. Also has a YouTube channel where he talks to different people about cultural issues of the day. Sho
Cool.
Baraka. He's an author and a rapper as well. Some people might be familiar with NF, just the letters NF. He's another guy who raps from a Christian worldview. I'm trying to think, even getting to more of the mainstream guys, Kanye West has recently made a profession of faith in Christ, and so I've been kind of praying for him and looking to see where his life goes from there. I know he's a very polarizing, controversial figure, but within the past several years, he has made a confession of faith. So it'd be interesting to see where his story continues to go. Yeah, there's another guy, Chance the Rapper, who is a Christian as
I've
well.
heard of him. Yeah,
Yeah,
I've heard he's
yeah.
good.
So yeah, he's good. And a lot of these guys do have some language things. I wouldn't just throw them on in front of the kids. Some of them don't at all, but others there might be some. So just dip your
Yeah,
toe in
yeah, absolutely.
and see. Um,
Be prudent, I guess. Yeah,
sure.
yeah.
But yeah, I
No,
do think that it's an art form worth checking out. I mean, it's one of the most popular, if not the most popular art form in the world. And that's another thing that we can mention briefly is it came from a certain place, and we always have to pay homage and realize where this art form came from. But it's a global art form now.
yeah, absolutely.
It gets to the point where a guy like myself sees a way that I can tell my story and the story of Christ within the context
Hmm.
of this art form. So
Yeah,
it is kind of for everybody.
yeah, and that's a theme that I always want to push is, if you want to evangelize, you need to know your world, right? And if you're out of touch, you're not going to be convincing anyone, especially if the best way to evangelize is through example, and you demonstrate that you don't like any of the things that the people that you're trying to convert like, then good luck with that, and
Yeah,
I'm not arguing you have to like everything, right? You don't have to like every
sure.
single thing. Where Chesterton still says, a living thing moves against the stream, right?
Hmm.
But you want to be in the stream. You want to just
Yeah,
be flatly
yeah.
on the side of the beach. So yeah, no, but that's great. I'm so glad you gave all of those examples, so we can look that up, and that's a great way to start, right?
Yeah, I think
Yeah.
so. Well, and just briefly here, it's the kind of that last quote that I read where Chesterton said, if someone's going to write about somebody, they need to not take out the notebook and say, I'm an expert on this group of people. They need to say, no, I'm a man.
Hmm.
I'm a man too, a human being. I think that when art does its job, it reminds us that we are all brothers. We are all created in the image of God. We are all brothers and sisters under God. Not obviously not everybody is of this family of faith, but in the sense that the common brotherhood of man that
Hmm.
Chesterton talked a lot about. There's nobody is better or worse. We're all equal in the sight of God. We're all created equal, and I think that that's something that Chesterton um,
Yeah.
would would espouse.
Yeah, excellent point. Yeah. Well, thank you, Alan. That was so great. I really enjoyed that conversation.
Yeah, I
Again,
thought that was fun.
people, yeah, yeah, absolutely. Again, if you guys have opinions and you want to voice them, agree or disagree, or just say anything, put them in the YouTube comments. We really appreciate that. And yeah, for those who were with us at the conference, hope you enjoyed it. Thank you all for listening. And until next time, help us to make uncommon sense more common.